All right, welcome everyone to the Liquidity Book Workshop number 3. We are on number 3, and I guess we just highlight kind of like why we have these workshop sessions. You know, certainly more recently over the last couple of weeks, we've seen lots of new liquidity providers participating in Liquidity Book, which is great. But Liquidity Book is you are providing active liquidity. It is complex. It can be risky. There's lots to learn. There's lots to take in. Liquidity Book is a novel protocol as well, and there are some differences between this type of protocol and others that let you provide active liquidity. And certainly, we see that with this recent wave of liquidity providers that are engaging in the community and discussing simple things like, what shape to deploy, what's the bin, etc. And sometimes, even the more intermediate or advanced liquidity providers may still not understand X or Y, perhaps, related to the Liquidity Book. And we don't want that within the community. We want an open community that helps people to learn. We want to encourage active participation around information sharing, and we don't want you to be perhaps either like nervous or worried or feel like you have, I don't know, even imposter syndrome around providing liquidity on Liquidity Book, because this picture sums it up. You may be sitting there thinking, I don't know what X or Y means, and everyone else is discussing it. We don't want you to feel like you're big bird at the boardroom, right? We want everyone to actively participate, share, inform each other. And we also, on the team side, we want to make sure we've got the right content available for you to dive into, be it workshops such as this, or written content on our Duck Center, just anything really. So that's why we're having this workshop. It is to help you understand how to use Liquidity Book. It's to help you to understand the fundamentals of Liquidity Book, so you can make the best decisions possible to help you achieve your personal goals. Obviously, we don't want you to come along, deposit your liquidity, and for it to be gone. That's not going to happen. There's just an image trying to sum up. These workshops are useful to help you understand the basics, so you can make well-informed decisions around utilizing the power that Liquidity Book offers you as a market maker, as a liquidity provider. So this is a strategy workshop number 3. We're going to talk about some basics, and just an important disclaimer: this is, of course, all educational content. This workshop is not financial advice. Everything we discuss here is to help you understand what X or Y means, or how you can do X or Y using Liquidity Book, right? This is not financial advice. You, of course, should always undertake your own research before providing liquidity into a Liquidity Book pool. And so what are the topics today? So we're going to talk about discretization, and this is something which has really been questioned a lot recently. There's a big reason for that. So we're going to talk to you about discretization, what it means, and why is Liquidity Book, what its specific, unique kind of architecture, and we're also going to talk about some more basic stuff. So typically, how to earn fees. We've seen this question a lot, certainly over the last couple of weeks as well, and also connected to that, basic shapes. So the shapes that we have on the UI, why you would potentially want to deploy them, and how you go about deploying them. Single-sided liquidity. This has been something which has really been used a lot, particularly connected to the ARB token. We've seen lots of people wanting to position their liquidity on a single side of the market. So we're going to talk about that and how you can go about deploying that, various strategies that community members deploy on a single-sided part of the market. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the Makers Club, how you can be more involved in this community, how you can tap into the expertise of some of the proven makers or liquidity providers that we have. So we're going to talk about that high level as well. How does that sound, Davide? Is that a good lineup for today?
Sounds like a very exciting and intense lineup of topics to discuss.
An intense lineup. Hopefully it's not intense. It is, of course, recorded, so you can watch this back on YouTube if it does get too intense for you. Trying to make this as easy as possible. That's why you have me talking about it.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we also have questions that can be written in the chat. So if you would like us to explore a bit more in details or in more simple words, any type of topics, just write it down in the chat and we'll support you.
Yes, very good point. So if you want to ask a question as we're going through, just use the chat. If you want to ask something completely different to what's being discussed, you can also use the chat, and we'll try to get to it at the end of the session. We are trying to wrap this up within the hour as well. We don't want it to go on for too long, but yeah, very open for questions. So just throw them as and when, and we'll get to them when appropriate. So discretization. So to understand discretization in real terms, we just kind of want to explain the fundamental nature of the Liquidity Book, AMM. So Liquidity Book is what we call, it offers discretized liquidity. So the architecture of Liquidity Book is discretized bin architecture. So each liquidity pool that is opened on Liquidity Book is what we call discretized by bins. And each bin in a Liquidity Book pool will represent a fixed price point for those assets in the pool. So you can see this graph that we've got on the slide here. This specific graph has 7 bins, okay? So it's P11 up to P17, and each of these bins has a fixed price point for the assets that is representing in that liquidity pool. And you can see the bars going up and down. That is just visualizing liquidity held within those bins that are stuck on that fixed price point within the liquidity pool. So as a user, as a liquidity provider such as yourselves, when you deposit liquidity into a Liquidity Book pool, before you're depositing, you're defining your price range, or you're selecting a specific shape. You're then depositing your liquidity, and that liquidity will be taken and deposited into any range of bins that you've selected within that Liquidity Book pool. Now, it's discretized because the discretization refers to essentially the gaps between those bins. You can see on the graph and that visual, there are 7 bins with liquidity in, and there are gaps between them. That is a picture of the actual architecture of a Liquidity Book pool. There are gaps between these fixed price points. And we call these gaps, we call them a bin step. So it's a step from one bin to another bin. Okay, and the bin steps, and you can go onto any Liquidity Book pool now. You can look at the analytics or your own liquidity, and you can move across each of those bins that liquidity is in. And you'll notice that the price points for those bins, as you move across, will have a specific percentage change in that price. So we've got examples here. A bin step can be 0.02% price difference per bin, can be 0.2%. It can be even a 1% price difference between those bins. Or it can be anything in between, depending on the discretization of the liquidity pool. But it's important to note that the bin step within one liquidity pool is always the same bin step across the entire price range of all these bins. Okay, so each Liquidity Book pool has a set discretization. You can see that on the UI. It will be BPS, that stands for basis points. So it can be 100 basis points, which is equivalent to a 1% price difference between those bins. It can be 20 basis points. That's the 0.2% difference. So 0.2% bin step. Or it can be 2 basis points, which would be the 0.02%, or it can be different. Okay, so that is the fundamental kind of architecture of a liquidity book pool. And I'm going to talk about why this is different compared to other concentrated liquidity AMMs. So liquidity book pool is discretized liquidity. You have other concentrated liquidity AMMs that are very popular. Obviously, we've got the Uniswap V3 design. There's also one called Algebra, which is essentially the same architecture. So that's a continuous flow liquidity design or liquidity AMM, also referred to as tick bound ranges. So a user comes along, they decide they're going to provide liquidity on Uniswap V3. They select their price points, so $1 to $2, and then they deposit their liquidity. And in that continuous flow kind of AMM, their tick bound range, $1 to $2, they deposit their liquidity, and their liquidity covers that entire range that they selected. But there's no discretization, there's no gaps. They're not placing their liquidity into bins that are fixed price points. They cover their entire price range in a continuous flow with their liquidity. And to achieve that, they are given, well, that is a non-fungible position. So the user is given back NFT to mark their unique, their very distinct, unique price range that they're providing liquidity over. With Liquidity Book, with a discretized architecture, it's different. So Liquidity Book stacks liquidity vertically. So the previous slide we talked about, the architecture of a liquidity book pool is defined by bins that occupy fixed price points. Now these bins, they are essentially bins that everyone accesses. So all of us here today, if we decide to deposit liquidity in a price range of $1 to up to $2, our liquidity will all go into the same bins. So that is a fungible architecture because we're all placing liquidity into the same containers that are holding our liquidity together. We are given back a fungible token receipt because essentially our positions will all have a percentage of that liquidity in those bins that we deposit liquidity into. So it's a fungible liquidity position because the architecture is one which essentially allows everyone to place liquidity into the same sort of bin or into the same area of when they're depositing or supplying their liquidity. So Liquidity Book as an AMM compared to Uniswap V3 or a continuous flow kind of model similar to Uniswap V3 is the fundamental difference is your liquidity is placed into the same containers or bins that other liquidity providers are putting their liquidity into. So it's not a unique position that you've got because you're given it's a fungible architecture. And that means that Liquidity Book as an AMM is more composable because of these fungible token positions. They can be integrated or built on top of other by other protocols. Fungible token positions are obviously they can be divided, they can be mixed up, they can be taken elsewhere and deposited into a different type of product on top of their liquidity pool position. You can't do that with a non-fungible token receipt, or it's much harder to do that because non-fungible tokens are unique. They are unique to the owner. When you try and mix them up, it is of course more difficult to do that. So that is a key difference of discretized liquidity versus a continuous flow liquidity AMM such as Uniswap V3. The fungibility of those tokens, enhancing the composability that Liquidity Book offers the kind of the wider DeFi space or the wider DeFi ecosystem. Kind of rambled on there a little bit. Davide, do you want to like add anything onto there? I've got one more point connected to discretization that I want to talk about, but I'll give you a chance to chip in.
Well, this approach of vertical liquidity stacking allows this efficient use of liquidity in a way that anyone can add, remove, or rebalance their positions without having to touch their overall entire position. And this is a topic that we will see more in the fungible part, but we already hinted at. But it's also a key component of this discretization, because when users deploy liquidity in a range of bins, each bin is independent, and the deployment is just a process. When a user deploys across a range, to deploy easily across this range that we mentioned, but the discretization can be taken to the single bin level, and that's one of the powerful features, that customization can actually be applied completely and not range bound. So the biggest advantage is just simply that you don't have to create 10 if you want to build a pyramid shape, you don't have to deploy 10 NFTs, one narrower than the other, but you can just do it vertically, and that is way more customizable.
Yeah, the graph kind of highlights the granularity of providing liquidity. You can come along, you define your price range, you deposit your liquidity, it goes into all of the separate price bins, or the bins that you've deposited or that you've chosen. And that means you can come along at any point and decide to remove liquidity from, maybe one of those 10 bins, or maybe 5 of those 10 bins. Or you can add more liquidity on top of some of those bins that you've already deposited liquidity into. So the discretized approach means that you can access each individual bin if you want to, either by removing or adding more liquidity onto those bins.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So with Uni v3, with that continuous kind of flow design, that your liquidity is marked with an NFT over that range that you select, that means you can't amend part of that position because you've taken a unique, distinct position. So you can't come along and decide, actually, I want to remove part of this. You'd have to remove the whole thing. Or if you want to build on top of it, you have to take a whole new position on top of it. And so you would layer up your position. So to create the pyramid on the left, you have to open all of those positions individually. And you can't edit those positions individually. To create the position on the right, you can create that position with granular deployments, where you can add positions on top of each other.
Yeah, let's imagine that for whatever reason, when we said before the example of 10 NFTs staked on top of each other to build the pyramid shape, if you would want to remove liquidity from the central point, let's imagine the center is $1 and everything before and after is different price points. With the NFT approach, to remove only from $1, you'll have to destroy all 10 NFTs and build 20 NFTs with liquidity to the left and liquidity to the right to rebuild the same without that single price point. With Liquidity Book, you can just remove liquidity from a single bin and keep everything intact.
Yeah. So discretization. So the main reason I wanted to talk about discretization today is that when the ARB token deployed, we opened 4 markets. So we opened ARB USDC 2 times and then ARB ETH 2 times as well. Now, people are asking, what are the differences between these pools? So we got the example here, ARB USDC. We have 2 pools. They have different discretizations. So one is actually 100 bips discretization, with a 0.8% base fee of trading. And then another is 20 bips discretization. And this has a 0.2% base fee to trade through. So why do we have these two pools? What are the differences? Well, as we know, as we just discussed, discretization is going to refer to the bin step between these bins in this liquidity book pool. So on the left side, 100 bips discretization will mean there is a 1% price difference between these bins. So there's a 1% price gap between each bin in that liquidity book pool. The 20 bips is a 0.2% price difference or bin step between those bins in that pool. And so the easiest way to describe the difference of this as a liquidity provider is the green boxes in the 100 bips pool. If you deploy your liquidity over 10 bins, you're covering a 22% price range on that curve. 20 bips or the 0.2% discretization in that for the ARB-USDC pool, deploying over the same amount of bins, so that's 10, that covers a 4% price range on that curve. So you can see the impact there of how wide your liquidity is spread over with the same amount of bins based on the discretization of those pools. And what that ultimately means is, as a liquidity provider, you have a choice of hard mode or easy mode, essentially. So hard mode being the 20 bips pool, there is going to be, obviously there they are the same tokens, so the price is going to be moving the same, but as a liquidity provider, you would have to cover a wider range of liquidity in the 20 bips pool if you don't want to be moved out of range based on the token price of ARB going up or down. If you want easy mode, if you want to supply your liquidity over a wide range, a wider discretization, the 100 bips pool may be for you, because you can deploy your range over with much further reach over a small amount of bins, and it's going to be easier to provide liquidity into that pool because the price is not going to be, the bins are not going to be as volatile as the lower discretization pool. So you will have an easier time in that pool providing liquidity. The other consideration is because of the larger discretization, there is a higher base fee to trade through that pool. So naturally, as a liquidity provider, you want it to be as easy as possible. But there's a risk-reward approach here. If you go into the lower discretization pool, it's cheaper to trade through, and therefore it's likely to receive more trading volume, which could lead to more fees as a liquidity provider. However, it's obviously a bit harder to provide liquidity into that pool because you're expecting the bins, the lower discretization will mean that the bins are more volatile. So you may either want to provide a larger range to ensure you're capturing volatility, or you're more able to manage it closely to keep your liquidity in range. So that's the decision you have. You have easy mode or hard mode, depending on the discretization of the pools. And that's kind of why we've deployed both of those pools at different that pool at different discretizations, to give liquidity providers options with how they want to experience that liquidity. They either want to go hard mode or easy mode. And actually, both of these pools are performing quite well in terms of how much volume they're capturing. So it's worked out pretty well. Do you have anything you want to add on to that, Davide? Or any questions about discretization, perhaps?
No, there is something that we need to point out where people can find the discretization on our UX, or where not to get confused on.
Yes. So to understand the discretization of the pool, it's not on the pool page where you see the percentage. That percentage is actually referring to the base fee to trade. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a discretization of the pool. If you click into each liquidity book pool, you should see the number on what 100 bips or 20 bips. That refers to the actual discretization. Now, typically the base fee is going to be the same as the discretization, but in some cases it's slightly different. So you can use the base fee as an indication of the possible discretization. I mean, or you can calculate it yourself by just going to the analytics, looking at the prices between each bin, and then working out the price percentage change. That will be discretization.
So when they see 100 bips on the page, they will not see the 100 bips. They'll see the 80.
Yeah, that's actually an issue on the UI. That specific bips figure is wrong. It should be 100. Okay, nice team, good work. Thank you very much. That's the comments we like to see. Okay, so discretization is probably that's definitely the hardest part of this workshop. So now we're going to talk about fees, how to earn fees, because this is the thanks to Mount Doji for the screenshot. Yeah, the 80 bips is wrong. It should be 100 bips. How to earn fees. This is probably the most common question that we get, and the easiest answer is how to earn fees is to keep your liquidity in the active bin. So what's the active bin? This is the active bin. It's the bin with two colors in it. There'll be a green and a purple color. This is the active bin. It's got two colors in it. This is the active bin because it has two colors in it. See, it's $1.0001. That is the active bin. That is being traded. That is the live market price for that liquidity book pool. Traders are coming along and they're swapping liquidity in this pool. This is the active bin right in the middle. It's got two colors. This is the active bin. It's not what you would expect. The active bin always has two colors. That is the live market price of any liquidity pool. It's the bin with the two colors on it. And that means traders are coming along, they're swapping liquidity out of that pool, or they're putting liquidity in and out. And you, as a liquidity provider, if you have your liquidity in the active bin, as liquidity is being swapped around, you're taking a percentage of that fee that is distributed amongst liquidity providers. That is how you earn. And do we want to talk about anything? So basically, the aim of the game as a liquidity provider is to always keep your liquidity in the active bin, depending on your strategy, of course. The more liquidity you have in the active bin, the higher percentage that you may be able to share from those trading fees. Now, it's not always going to be, if you put all of your liquidity into a bin, you will earn more. Doesn't work straight like that. So the amount of fees that you can earn is also going to depend on the current dilution of the active bin. So you can have more liquidity in the active bin than your other bins, but if that specific active bin has loads of liquidity in, you could have a smaller percentage compared to potentially the other bin. So the bin dilution will also factor into how much fees you earn. And the analytics, we've been carefully treading away, adding more and more features into the analytics to provide more enriching data. You can use the analytics tab to help inform you of your strategy and how you deploy your liquidity. How wide you go with your liquidity, how much liquidity you decide to place into certain bins. I actually quite looking at the stable markets, because you'll notice in most stable markets, obviously the majority of the liquidity is stacked into typically the $1 bin. But in some of these pools, you'll see more of a tranched distribution where there is still liquidity in bins, either side of the $1 bin is significantly less liquidity. It typically gets less trading volume, but there's a bit of a game involved, because actually as a liquidity provider, you may find your liquidity in the bins that are, either side of the $1 bin could pick up a greater share of fees because of the significantly lower dilution. Sometimes stablecoins do, they do trade outside of $1. So, you can use essentially the analytics tab to help inform you of the current pool distribution. You can understand the bins that are being traded for that liquidity pool. So you can get a picture of actually what are good bins that do get trading through it that aren't necessarily as diluted as the other bins, the main bins that you're thinking about, and is there opportunities to potentially earn more in lower traded bins due to lower level of dilution. So, how you earn fees, to wrap this up, keep your liquidity in the active bin, and the amount of fees you earn will represent your share of your liquidity in that active bin at the time of fees being taken. And the analytics that we're kind of building out steadily, now that we have our dedicated analytics backend up that went up a couple of weeks ago, we can start providing more and more data onto the front end to really drive enrichment and additional insights into the analytics of how bins are traded, what shapes are really working for liquidity providers, etc. It's a big area that we want to expand on, and we're excited to start post v2.1 deployment. We're excited to start building out more analytics, more data points to help you make better decisions and more informed strategies. Davide, anything on active bins, fees?
Yeah, that while looking at the pool distribution, it's possible to also make decisions, as you were saying. The pool distribution also at just for an analyst allows you to understand what's the likelihood of price moving easily and fast through it. As you can see, for example, on this chart, we can expect that moving price below 1738 is going to be harder till price reaches that point, and then faster after that point is reached. And this is also a way to have, for anyone, like projects or protocol that want to have deep liquidity on a certain price point, they deploy liquidity in that range. And that means that trading can happen easily and smoothly for end users, and liquidity can be exchanged without much slippage between swaps, as long as there is deep liquidity. So you can imagine that there is going to be a certain resistance of price to drop quickly below when liquidity is very thick, and there is a higher attitude of price to move quicker when liquidity is lower.
Yeah, so deeper liquidity in these bins adds to support or resistance for live market pricing. I think yesterday with AVAX hitting $18.25 per in the liquidity book pool, we had basically hit a cliff of deep liquidity on the AVAX token. I think if the price went any higher, there's significantly less AVAX liquidity being provided, something like 10 times less in those ranges and above. No one had shifted their AVAX token. So as a market maker, you coming along, this price point and above, significantly less dilution. I can supply AVAX there, and I would earn way more fees relatively to providing a different range. And that insight is there just on the analytics pool distribution page. So very useful.
A market maker looking for volatility might not like to provide liquidity when it's too deep, because it means low volatility and also lower share of fees in that case. So it's a matter of trade-offs.
Yeah, right. Moving on. Basic shapes. So another popular question: what shape should I deploy? Or what is curve? How do I customize my range, etc. We've had it all, and this is always a popular question since Liquidity Book has launched. What are the shapes? Why should I deploy X or Y? So really kind of high level, top down overview of these basic shapes that we have on the UI. First of all, of course, we're going to talk about Spot. It is the shape that lets you customize your deployment in any way, shape, or form. You can see in the various channels as well. Community members have taken to creating what they call bin art. So they're just creating random shapes and then photoshopping stuff on. But that is essentially to highlight the customization that is on offer with Spot. You can deploy using Spot multiple transactions of liquidity to create any type of shape that you want to. Spot gives you complete customization. It's flexible, versatile. You can see on the right, there's a variety of different shapes there. At the top, we've got more of a volatility capture, so there's a gap in the middle. We've got just below that 2 different shapes. So we've got a wide range set up, and then someone's additionally stacked additional liquidity at a certain price point. The shape below that deployed over a number of different ranges, almost like a staggered approach upwards. So they're kind of as a token price increases, they're picking up more. So the purple's converting more into the green, staggering up like a DCA approach. And then down the bottom, it's almost like a ranged limit order approach to sell out of a token. The lower the price gets, that's deployed over 5 different transactions. Mount Doji is sharing in the chat variety of bin art pictures. These are new ones actually. They're pretty good. The truck.
How do we put these shapes into the recording, Mount Doji? Make sure to add them in post.
Yeah, we need like a bin art competition. But Spot is your customization shape. It is the shape to deploy a range of different strategies, and you can be creative with it. I think the most common use is being able to kind of stagger up liquidity over a price range, or creating volatility kind of capture shapes where you've got a big gap in the middle and you're providing liquidity at support lines and maybe up to resistant lines because you're trying to time essentially buying or selling at lows or highs. And yeah, that is shape, that is Spot. Build your shapes over multiple price ranges, over multiple transactions. Get flexible, get versatile with it. You can really kind of deploy any type of shape to fit your own strategies and your personal conviction. Curve, this is a preset shape. Clicking curve on the UI deploys your liquidity over 11 bins. It is a concentrated deployment of liquidity, so the majority of your liquidity is concentrated across 5 bins. That's the active bin, and then 4 bins either side. So it's not entirely suitable for volatile pairs because it's a narrow deployment. 11 bins is very concentrated. You can see on this example at the top, this is a deployment of Tether and ETH. It covers a price range of 1,556 to 1,579 of ETH. Most of you will know that even intraday volatility of ETH, you'll see price movements above and below that. It's very common. So this is really not a suitable shape for a volatile pair. And ETH in this case is a volatile pair. If you do deploy this shape, it is very well recommended to carefully monitor, track prices of whatever assets you're deploying the shape over, because of the narrow deployment and the concentrated approach across 5 bins as well. You can deploy this as a single side. You can do that by, when you select curve, you enter the token amounts that you want to deploy. In the example I've got here, I essentially entered, 99% of my liquidity is ETH, 1% is Joe, and that gives you a almost like a reverse kind of gradient with my ETH. So concentrated in the middle, and it scales down the further out it goes. So that is how you deploy single-sided using Curve. Bid ask, again, this is a preset shape on the UI. It's more of a situational usage. It's the least popular shape that liquidity providers will want to deploy. It could be suitable for pegged assets that has some level of volatility, with liquidity providers wanting to take advantage of the lower dilution in the bins outside of the typical price range that an asset may trade through. So it's a way for you to capture volatility and increase the percentage of your liquidity in bins. Again, it's fixed on 11 bins, so it's the same size as Curve. It's essentially an inverse to Curve as well. You can again deploy this as single-sided. See, many liquidity providers want to use this to DCA in or out of a token, and again, you do this by, the example we've got here is USDC and USDT. I've essentially deployed $99 of USDT and $1 of USDC. So it's a way for you to kind of deploy a DCA in or out shape as well, and it gradually picks up the further out it goes. I'm trying to maximize my efficiency of selling my tether for USDC here. It's a good question. It's not possible yet to deploy a bid ask or a curve and customize the range of bins of how you're deploying this over. You have to use Spot for a customized approach with your bin range. We do plan to radically overhaul the user experience with shapes, something which we can get to soon. The dev focus right now is on V2.1 deployment, but we do want to improve your customization across these different shapes. Essentially, like end goal really is to give you guys the chance to pretty much paint your actual kind of deployment. So you can just create any shape you want to, have any range of customization or flexibility when you're deploying it. That's the end goal. We'll get to there at some point. But for now, bid, ask, and curve, they are fixed to 11 bin range. If you want this type of approach, you can use Spot and just deploy over multiple transactions for now. Lastly, basic shapes, preset range, a preset shape on the UI, wide. This deploys over 50 bins. You can't change that. It's always 50 bins. It's ideal. Many members have found it ideal for intraday volatility, relatively small volatility, depending on the pool that you're deploying this on. It's not ideal for large amounts of volatility in the market, even if you deploy it over, for example, a slightly less volatile token compared to others, maybe ETH, USDC. If you deploy wide into that pool, it's, if there is big volatility within the market, this shape may go out of range. So it's not a shape that you can deploy and come back to a week later, because you'll likely find you're completely out of range and you've stopped earning fees. It's good for typical intraday volatility. Sometimes you may lose the range slightly, but it could come back. So it's something which you still want to monitor closely or carefully, but it is relatively good for intraday volatility. So it gives you some peace of mind. You don't have to micromanage your position, but it's not good for big volatility in the market. You will have to potentially reposition if market's all red. You can deploy stuff like sell or buy walls. Again, it's all about you're entering 99% of your tokens on one side, 1% in the other side, and you can get a sell wall or you can get a buy wall. And these are quite good if you've seen some sort of, if you're doing your own analysis and you're thinking a certain range is probably going to there's support or there's perhaps resistance there. You're doing your own TA, or you're looking at sentiment across a certain token, and you may want to deploy a sell or a buy wall where you're trying to obviously sell one token or buy the other around your predefined kind of price range, where you're marking support or resistance. So with wide, you do have that level of customization, again, like the other preset shapes, just by entering a different ratio of tokens. It doesn't always have to be a 50-50 split of tokens. Let me look at some questions. Do you mean that with Uni v3, people can't provide liquidity at the same price point? Yes, every liquidity provider using Uni v3 or a continuous flow AMM can provide liquidity on the same price points. It just means that as a liquidity provider, you take a unique position, and that unique position is marked by a non-fungible token receipt. Whereas in Liquidity Book, all liquidity providers that provide liquidity over, for example, the same price range will essentially be depositing their liquidity into a bin which everyone else has the liquidity in. So it's a fungible design. You have a fungible token receipt given back to you. So that token receipt will basically say you own 1% of all the liquidity in this bin, and in this other bin you own, I don't know, 5% of the liquidity. So it's a Liquidity Book is fungible liquidity, and on Uniswap v3 or the tick-bound AMM such as Algebra or Uni v3, you take up unique positions marked by a non-fungible token. And yes, there is a doc. There is a doc that there is a doc that goes over these basic shapes, the advantages, drawbacks, considerations for deploying each one. It also covers off like customization that you have for these different shapes. So Mount Doji, maybe you can just share the liquidity strategies doc. What's the difference between the one-sided buy or sell walls for wide and the DCA for bid and ask shapes? So with the DCA in bid or ask, you are set to 11 bins when you deploy the shape. If you use it more to one side, your liquidity, there's 6 bins there. Essentially, it's just 5 actually, excluding the active bin. With wide, it's over a larger price range. So your liquidity covers 50 bins in total. The other key difference between these two shapes is that liquidity deployed in the wide shape is what we call uniform. So each bin has the same amount of liquidity spread over it. That's why you can see the flat shape. Whereas using bid ask or curve, it's not a uniform distribution of your liquidity. And yeah, as I've already touched on, we do plan to enhance the UX on offer when you're deploying your liquidity. So this means that we do want to build on what these shapes offer you in terms of customization and your approach to providing liquidity. Another question here. So, but both also performs the DCA function, just at different price range and liquidity levels. Yes, so you can use wide to essentially DCA in. You can use bid ask to DCA in as well or out. They can perform the same function. It would just be a different risk approach that you take. So with bid ask, you're deploying liquidity over a shorter range of bins, and there's a gradient to your liquidity as well. If you use wide and you want to deploy a sell or a buy wall, you're essentially covering 25 bins in a uniform approach. So it would cover a larger price range automatically. So this is almost like you're taking you can call this a slightly less risky approach to DCA or to deploying a DCA in strategy via bid and ask. because you're spreading out the price range that you're covering liquidity on. And of course, the uniform approach to liquidity, it's a flat range. So you're not concentrating your liquidity in a few bins as you would be if you're taking the gradient shape of bid and ask when DCAing in or out. You can, of course, I'll go back to spot. You can, of course, decide to use spot to DCA in or out. So the shape at the bottom, you can see that's a ranged limit order strategy being deployed. Someone's come along, they've made 5 spot transactions, deploying more liquidity in each successive transaction over a larger price range. So you can get creative. Maybe you're marking specific price points that you think the token is going to go to, and you want to max your efficiency by concentrating more of that, lower or higher in the price range. Cool. I mean, we're kind of talking about it now, single-sided liquidity. So you can, I would say this is probably LiquidityBook's best kept secret. It is using this AMM to buy or sell a token. And the best part about it is you are essentially don't have to pay swap fees to swap tokens using LiquidityBook. By deploying your LiquidityBook, your liquidity into a LiquidityBook pool, you can essentially have that converted to the other token, so you can buy or sell another token without paying swap fees. And better yet, you essentially earn fees for doing it. So it's almost like you're getting paid to trade. There are considerations that you need to think about. That is, at the moment, if you're depositing your liquidity into a LiquidityBook pool with the intention to have it almost traded for the other token, you will have to watch that position carefully, because there is currently we do not have limit orders available, so there's no automatic execution of withdrawing your liquidity if your price range is hit. So you will have to monitor it. You can say this is a less risky approach in some ways to simply taking your tokens and trading it immediately. If you want to utilize LiquidityBook to enter or exit a token, you can deploy your liquidity over a range. So essentially, you can DCA in or out instead of just buying the immediate market price on a spot transaction. So it's a different risk approach to trading tokens. It's lower fees because you're not paying anything to do that. You're not paying a swap fee, and you can earn fees from it. I'm going to show some examples of different deployments of single-sided liquidity now as well. So this example here, this is liquidity pool XYZ. You've got token B, and we've got token A. So example 1, users come along, they've deposited token B from price point 0.9988 down to 0.9981. That's roughly over 9 bins that liquidity has been deposited. My expectation here is that I've done some analysis and I'm thinking actually there's going to be support for this token at this specific price range. Roughly, this is what I think is going to happen. Token A is going to lose value, but I like token A, so I want to buy some token A's. And my analysis is showing that there's support around this price range. So I've deposited token B here with the expectation that token A loses value to around this range, converts my token B's that I've deposited into token A. And as soon as that price is hit, as soon as I've picked up token A at this price level, I'm going to withdraw my liquidity after. So that's an example of deploying single-sided liquidity. And maybe you decided actually over the course of the day, you're expecting, you've seen some news and actually, oh wait, I think this token A is going to go down in value even more than my original expectation. So I've withdrawn my liquidity and I've redeposited it from 0.9981 down to 0.97. I'm expecting some more volatility for token A. I think the price is going to go even lower than my original expectation. So to lower my risk somewhat, what I've done here is I've also deposited over a wider range this time. Because while I feel like there is going to be volatility to a lower kind of support level, I'm not sure. And actually, I want to reduce my risk somewhat. So I'm taking a wider approach to this liquidity. So I'm not as concentrated as this first position. It's a wider position. And this allows me to reduce that level of risk that, you know what, I don't want to buy everything at 0.9981 and then see the price go down to 0.97. So I'm spreading my liquidity over a larger range with this specific example. Other strategies, we talked about it already, range limit orders in or out. So in this specific example, I think that I want to sell some of my token A. You know, I want to try and DCA out as well. And by doing that, I'm taking a range limit order approach here. I've deposited 3 times over specific price points. And each time I'm increasing the amount of liquidity that I'm depositing. I'm trying to maximize the efficiency of how I'm kind of scaling out of this coin. So I'm putting more and more tokens in each higher price point in the hopes that, yes, if token B does increase to this price, that I'm selling my token A for a higher price point. And this is just a better way for me to just, you know, instantly trade token A at the current market price, or maybe I'm just holding all of token A and I'm waiting to trade at a current price that I think it might hit. I'm using Liquidity Book here to swap at different price points without paying any swap fees, and I'm going to earn some trading fees for doing that as well by providing liquidity. And again, this is another example of I'm selling token A. I'm overexposed. I've got lots of token A, so I deployed a big range here, really wide range, and I've done that because, well, I have lots of tokens. I don't want to concentrate it. I want it over a wide range. I also want to farm some fees here as well, and a large range will help you to earn more fees while you're waiting for a certain price point to hit. In this case, 1.005. So we're going to farm lots of fees by doing this, and I'm going to essentially, my intention here is if it hits to 1.005, I've got rid of all of my token A for token B. I would have hopefully farmed some nice trading fees for doing so. And there you go. I've reduced my exposure to this token A, which maybe I have more of elsewhere. This looks like the wide sell wall pattern, example 4. Yes, this is essentially, this is similar to a sell wall. Davide, do you want to touch on any of these positions at all?
I'd rather check if anyone would like to have questions about these shapes, like when is a scenario that they think will make sense.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone have any comments, any questions? Yeah, we've really seen lots of essentially, you know, just general commentary here. Really seen lots of people asking how to deploy single-sided liquidity, and there's definitely, yeah.
We have a question asking if it's necessary to provide liquidity at the active bin when doing a sell wall. Well, first let's start that nothing is necessary, and also that the active bin might not be when someone wants to put a sell wall. A sell wall is where the market maker believes they want to start selling. So it might be the active bin, might be later, and the single-sided liquidity approach allows to select any point in the future. So you can decide to start selling it at 3,000 to 4,000 and no one stops you from deploying liquidity in that specific range.
Yeah, you don't have to provide liquidity into the active bin when deploying a single-sided. You can basically use spot. You can enter your exact price range that you want to provide liquidity, and you can deploy that liquidity. So that can be one side of the market. You can deploy over two sides, but essentially with spot, you have complete customization with where you add liquidity. So that can be, as Davide said, you can just deploy now if you want to. You can go to ETH USDC and put all your ETH in price ranges 3,000 to 4,000. And hopefully ETH's going to be that price soon. So
what happens when all my sell wall has been eaten up and price reverts back all the way? So assuming, let's have an hypothetical scenario where the movement happened only once in one direction and then reverted all the way back. So let's imagine like a spike and then goes all the way back to the original price. You will have earned twice the fees for each individual bin. So if a bin is set to have 0.2% of each trade, you will have earned that for each bin that you have been traversed every time. So minimum twice that amount, but you will be back to holding, if there was a sell wall and you're back to before, you will be back to holding the ETH that you had deposited as they were before, but you will have earned fees in the meantime. So to have a true sell wall that you want to keep as sold, one will have to withdraw the liquidity when the liquidity has been converted into USDC. So with the Liquidity Book, there are two things that one can do. They can just withdraw the USDC. So if it's a true sell wall and the intention is never to withdraw, for example, it, but just to withdraw the USDC from the sell wall, whenever liquidity moves to the right, one can withdraw USDC. So they remove liquidity from that specific section, while keeping all the liquidity to the right side, to the violet side. Alternatively, you can just wait, then the entire sell wall is over, and then withdraw entirely. That way, there was more exposure to the potential fees earned across the range, but there's always the theoretical risk of the strategy that liquidity could go back. So you haven't sold anything, you have just earned fees.
yeah, so Koyas, you touched on what all liquidity providers that are farming fees absolutely love. It's basically watching your bins turn, in this example in the middle here, watching your sell wall go all green and then go back down again. So it returns to this exact same position. And what you've done there is you've earned fees for going up, and then price has gone back to $1, and you've earned fees when those bins have gone back down again. And as a liquidity provider, that's a great feeling, because if you're there to farm fees, that's what you want. You want your bins to go up and down as many times as possible, because you're picking up fees every time it goes up and down.
Yeah, like if someone wants to hold and paper end it, it's better to provide liquidity and paper end after the fees have been collected. Hypothetically.
Yes, we like the fees. Okay. Lastly, just been going just over an hour now. Maker Club. or the Makers Club. There is an exclusive channel in this Discord for makers. So to join the Makers Club, the club essentially aims to get filthy rich by strategy sharing for Liquidity Book. This is a community governed mandate. It's obviously not directed from the team here. This is basically a community club. It's called the Makers Club. And to unlock access to this club channel in this Discord, to become a maker, and there's specific Discord roles for it, you need to unlock rewards in the Liquidity Books, in the Liquidity Book rewards program. So we're on epoch 3. Each epoch, basically, each epoch that we put up, you as a liquidity provider can participate in this by providing liquidity into the reward pools. So each liquidity pool that has a rewards tag onto it is a tracked liquidity pool where we're measuring your maker score, essentially. Your maker score is determined by how much fees you're earning within that pool. And if at the end of the epoch, your fees are high enough where they are at least 1% or more of the total fees earned in that liquidity book pool over that defined epoch duration, such as 2 weeks, you will qualify as a maker to receive extra Joe reward. Well, you will qualify as a maker to receive extra rewards in the form of Joe tokens. And that also means you will automatically unlock a maker role within this Discord where you can access the Maker Club channel. And this is more of an exclusive channel that aims to bring together the makers that we have that unlock rewards to encourage more kind of strategy sharing and education, information, all of that stuff. It's an exclusive channel. So we're on epoch 3 at the moment, which is ending today. We should have results for this epoch, hopefully shared tomorrow. But going forward in the future, if you want to join this club, we aim to run these epochs very successively after each other. So stay tuned for epoch 4. We'll have news on that soon. So by participating as a liquidity provider in these reward epochs, if you qualify, you will unlock a maker reward and a maker role, and that gives you access to the Makers Club. And there's also cool NFTs that you can mint as well if you're successful in unlocking this role. Right, that's it. Q&A. Does anyone else have any questions that they want to chat? They can join us on stage if they want to. Nope. No more questions? Excellent. I think we're done then. Just a regular question. When? And that's exactly why we've got the mystical orb here with Joe in the middle. When? I guess when v2.1, when SJO fee sharing deployment is underway. So you're going to have, deployment is underway, basically. You've seen people are sniping our GitHub, stuff's being merged, stuff's being pushed live, or in the final stages of testing. So any day now, we're going to start v2.1 deployment, literally any day. It could even be tomorrow that we start. Any day now. That's right. I guess it's important to highlight here as well that v2.1 is an entirely new code base essentially for Liquidity Book. So what that will essentially mean for you as a liquidity provider, new Liquidity Book pools will be replacing the existing ones. So there is going to be a requirement to migrate to the new pools when they're up and running. They'll happen in stages. I want to try and avoid as much disruption as possible. The migration is just a simple case of you withdraw your liquidity, you go to the new pool, and you redeposit your liquidity over the same price range, or you reposition it as you want. So there will be a migration process for liquidity book pools with v2.1 deployment. It will happen in tranches, in stages. The bigger change is that your fees will no longer be claimable. They will compound automatically into the active bin as they are earned. Okay, that's a big change. I think some people like to claim their fees or sit on them, but this is a big optimization for Liquidity Book. And this means that gas costs will come down by an average of 30 to 40% when you're supplying, withdrawing, changing, updating your liquidity. Also trading through these pools is now cheaper, like gas. Good question. Auto pool will be safe as the others LP. So auto pools this is our own product. Auto pools have been audited, of course. Auto pools are as safe as we can assure you they are. Ultimately, there is always risk involved with anything in DeFi. But we've, of course, taken our most prudent and diligent approach with safety, as we have always done. Always incredibly, we are always incredibly risk averse with absolutely everything that we do. Safety is, of course, the first and primary focus for us when developing and launching a product. It's always been. Where can we learn more? Changes about 2.1. There's been nothing released officially yet. We should hopefully have something out in the very next days. So your best place at the moment is to just ask in Discord. No more questions. Cool. Going to wrap it up now. And join us for the community call tomorrow. It's going to be Rocket Joe NFTs given out on this one. We've got some guests as well. Yeah, it's going to be good vibes tomorrow. Very chilled community call. One question. Okay, Tim, you have a question. Go on. No. V2.1 is for all. Auto pools will actually launch with more strategies, but if you're referring to the pool party event or the pool party campaign, it's only for free pools. All fees will be
What Amy
compounded.
is talking about is about the migration process. We will migrate a few pools at a time. So what you see in the front end, because the good news is that 2.1 might be live while the call was happening, is that a few pools will migrate to 2.1 and we will gradually move them over within the next days.
No, you can join the Makers Club at any point following a successive epoch in the LB rewards program. So each epoch, we're on epoch 3 at the moment, that finishes today. Results will be tallied up by tomorrow, likely, and then new makers will be given their roles if they have qualified. TJ plans to go to Ethereum at some point. Yes, I believe so. Well, it's not really confirmed, but probably. Analysis website for LP positions, which strategy and the price range. No, don't think so. You're probably referring to something like Revert, which there's nothing. It's nothing integrated yet like that. Okay, let's wrap it up. Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining. And yeah, join us for the community call tomorrow.
Thank you for joining.
Bye-bye.